Welcome to the world of practical carping. The rods are out, the baits are in position, the end tackles are absolutely spot on, the presentation is about as good as I can think of doing it at the moment, and things look good for a fish. Now you'll be looking at this thinking, it's all right for Jules, he's been fishing for years, he knows exactly what to do, he knows the best rigs, he knows the best baits, he even goes to the best venues. It's not true. You can watch these videos and you can learn everything that I know about carping, and in a few years' time I'm sure you'll catch even more carp than me. With these videos I've tried to encapsulate everything I know about carping in a clear, concise style which will help you catch carp. I'm not going to baffle you with theory, I'm not going to baffle you with long-winded explanations about why baits work and why baits don't work. I'm not even going to try and flog you all the tackle I can think of. I'm just going to try and help you catch carp. And to catch carp, you've got to be aware of the basics, and the basics are covered in 4 parts in each of the videos. In the first video, we'll be looking at choosing the right water, because that is vitally important. I'll also look at choosing the right major items of tackle, and then everybody's nightmare, the right choice of bait. Now, bait in itself is a subject, and I'll also cover bait application, because it doesn't matter if you've got the best bait in the world, if you apply it wrongly, you'll never catch carp. The first and most important factor to look at is choosing the right water. And the best place to look at that is in your own home. Now, no matter how good your choice of rig is, no matter how good your choice of bait is, and no matter how clever your choice of presentation is, if you're not on the right water, you'll never catch these fish. Now, I know that's very simple, and I know that when you are on the right water, it's something you can easily forget, but don't. It is the most important factor out of carp fishing, is picking the right water, because I can give you the best bait, I can give you the best presentation, and I can tell you what rod to use and what reel to use, but you can waste all the information I give you in these videos if you don't put yourself on the right water. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, it's all right for Jules, he fishes these waters full of big fish and it's okay for him. How do I go about it? Well, the most important factor, and I can't stress this too highly indeed, is to decide what size of fish you want to catch. Do you want to catch 5-pounders? Do you want to catch 10-pounders? Or do you want to catch 20-pounders or bigger? Now, I'd love to catch just 30-pounders, but you've got to be realistic. If you're a beginner or an inexperienced carp angler and watching these films and you're thinking, I'd like to catch 30-pounders or 40-pounders, really to a certain extent you're not thinking properly. You've got to catch the 5 and 10-pounders before you move on to catching the 20s and 30s. I'm at the stage where I'm happy catching 20-pounders, I'm thinking about 30-pounders. It's a natural progression. So decide what size of fish you want to catch before you go herring off trying to catch 20 and 30-pounders. You've decided what size of fish you want to catch, and if it's 10-pounders, that's great. You may be lucky, of course, and find that you're working. Your own personal circumstances will dictate very highly which sort of water you're choosing. Because if you're young and you haven't got your own car, or you haven't got much money, or maybe your wife doesn't let you go fishing very often, or your mum doesn't let you go fishing very often, then you can't go tearing all over the place, going down to Surrey one day, going down to Hampshire another day. You're going to be very restricted. So your own personal circumstances will dictate your choice of water. Be very reasonable about it. It's no good buying a pass for Yateley and going there only once a year. The chances of you getting success on one visit only are very minuscule. You're better off picking a water where you can go lots of times. So decide on the size of fish and your own personal circumstances. I hope you're employed, I hope you've got a job, and I hope you can go fishing as many times as I can. But that doesn't apply to everybody, and I realise that. The best choice of water obviously is your local water, because the more times you can go fishing, the better chance you have got of catching fish. Obviously, if you can only go to the water 1, 2 or 3 times a year, then your chances of catching it are very, very small. If you can go to the water 20 or 30 or 40 times a year, then that's great. So if you've got 2 waters to choose from, one is 5 miles from home and one is 50 miles from home, always go to the closest one, because you can go there more often. Even if it's not a case of fishing for the fish, you can actually watch them, you can bait up, and you can watch what other people are doing. So always go to these waters and pick the local waters more often than not. 10 years ago, when carp fishing was in its infancy, it was a different scene from today. There were no carp worlds, there was no coarse fishermen, there was no big carp, and the information that you had was very, very restricted. But nowadays, the sky's the limit. There are lots and lots of places you can get information from. Carp fishing isn't a secret anymore. People like me, people like Tim Paisley, Kevin Maddox, people like that, they're always writing about carp fishing, and I've always tried to help people catch carp. There is so much written about carp fishing nowadays, it's unbelievable. First thing is purchase a copy of BK's Guide to 1500 Carp Waters. Now I know what you'll be saying, Julian's only pushing the BK Guide because it's a Kevin Maddox distributed film. Well, that's not true. I've actually written a book myself on carp waters, but I'll be quite honest, this is the best book I've seen going on carp waters. 1500 waters here for you to choose from. Now when you pick up the book, you'll actually see there's lots and lots of details about the water. There's location, how to find, and details about the fish stocks. Sometimes the details are spot on, and sometimes they're slightly incorrect. So even if you do decide to choose a certain type of water, always research that water as much as you can. Read Angler's Mail, read Coarse Fisherman, pick up the weeklies. There are now 3 weekly papers you should read. There's a Carp Talk, which is geared purely and simply towards carp fishing. Angling Times, which does have a high carp content and actually has a carp page and water reports on certain areas. And the good old faithful Angler's Mail, that too has water reports pages, lots and lots of details about what's being caught and where it's being caught. So if it's a local water, you've researched it by looking at the BK book, you've cross-referenced it with these papers, and hopefully people like me may have written something about it. Go into your local tackle shop, they're a mine of information, which brings us on to syndicates and club waters. Now I know you'll be thinking, well, I can't get into these well-known waters, they're too restricted. Well, quite a few years ago that was true, and it's probably true with the very famous waters, your places like your Savays, your Redmire pools and places like that. They are difficult to get into, but most waters, certainly around the local areas, are very easy to get into. But what you've got to remember is there are a lot of people carp fishing today, and a lot of people carp fishing means permits get taken up quickly, so you've got to think about what you're doing. If there's a local water and you're thinking of fishing it now, then for goodness sake get a permit as soon as possible. I know that when I look at a water, certainly in the local area, I don't just think about the one water I want to fish this year, I think about the waters that I might want to fish next year and the year after that, because permits get snapped up left, right and centre. Waters that you could get into today, you won't be able to get into in 6 months or a year's time, and you'll kick yourself if you haven't got your permit well in advance. I know that I can't get into waters that I used to be able to get in years ago, and some waters have a 10-year waiting list. So don't just think of today, think of tomorrow with your carp fishing, and get your permit sorted out for the waters that you want to fish this year and the waters that you want to fish next year, because it's vitally important. Even if you know which water you want to carp fish, and if you can't get a permit for it, then that's a waste of time. The choice of tackle for today's carp angler is indeed varied and wide. I'm just looking through these catalogues and it's incredible now how well catered we are. I mean, there's rods, reels, everything you will ever need. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that today when you've seen the videos, you're going to rush out and buy all these items just because I use them, but I can honestly say that the items here today on display are items that I have total confidence in and would certainly advise you to look at. The major item of tackle that carp anglers are obsessed about is that of the carp rod. Now, I've 2 carp rods with me here today, both made by Daiwa, both of a similar test curve, both look, to all intent and purposes, exactly the same, and yet there's £100 difference between them. Both are 2 3/4 pound test curve, one is the amorphous and one is the power mesh. Now, I'm not going to ask you to rush out and spend £200 on a carp rod, because that's totally unreasonable. You are best off spending your hard-earned money on things like bait and tackle. The minor items of tackle are probably more important than the major items of tackle. Carp rods, really the rods that you've probably got, were sufficient for carp fishing. Again, these rods are quality rods, good blanks, proven blanks, very similar to all the top carp rods, the Rod Hutchinson ones, the Shimano rods. Rods are very, very similar, and if you spend £150 on a rod, that will probably suffice. I advise you to go into a tackle shop, pick a rod up and test it out yourself, because the items that may satisfy me may not satisfy you. these are good items. Now the reels on display, there's two reels here. We've got a Daiwa Regal Z, and we've also got the Shimano 500. Now again, both of these are the commonly used reels today, and I'm happy with both reels. The two parts of the reel that we are most concerned with is the clutch, which is operated by this at the back here, and the front of the spool here. Now the clutch is very important because today's carp angler usually plays the fish off the clutch. If the clutch is jerky and not smooth, it can lose your fish. So you must make sure that the clutch is silky smooth. Turning to the front of the reel, you can see that we have approximately an inch there between the front of the spool and the back of the spool. The greater that distance is, the better the reel will cast, because the narrower it is, the quicker the line will come off and catch the lip of the spool. So you want a large front here so that the line will peel off easily and you'll be able to cast a lot easier. And both the Daiwa and also the Shimano are excellent reels in this respect. Now the top reel, in respect to both of those matters, is a Daiwa SS3000. Now this is an expensive reel. This is around the £200 mark. Unless you're a top grade carp angler fishing at long distance for big fish, you really don't need to use a reel like this. But for long range fishing, you just look at the distance there in comparison to the reels, you can cast as far as you want and hardly any line will come off. So for long distance fishing, this is an excellent choice. Now an item that many carp anglers forget to purchase, and certainly it's an item that you should have with you, is a spool case. Now you never know when you're going to need some new line when you're fishing. You may find that a fish snags you up, you may find that your line fades, and you must have spare spools of line made up. Here I have two spare spools for the Shimanos, and there are many times when I've had to actually use spare spools. The line's been crinkled and you cannot afford to lose fish. You can't just chuck these in the side of your rucksack and hope that they'll be okay. Line can become trapped, wet and dirty. This is a Eustace spool cover, and as you can see, the spools just fit inside it, zip up, and you can get 4 or 5 spools inside there, well protected. Again, another item often discussed by the carp angler is which line to use. A few years ago we were restricted to just 2 kinds of main line. It was either Maxima or Silecast. Nowadays there are many good carp lines available. I've my 2 favourites here, and that's Big Game and Kevin Nash's Power Plus. Obviously when we cover certain situations like fishing to the weed and fishing at range, I'll actually tell you what kind of strength of line you'll want. But for general purposes, 12 or 15 pound line will suffice. Now both of these have advantages and disadvantages. Big Game is a well recognised line. Its problem is that it's a little stretchy and can kink a little, but it is very abrasion resistant, and because of the stretch you won't lose fish when they lunge under your rod tip. Now Kevin Nash's Power Plus line is similar to that of the Big Game. It has a high abrasion resistance, but it has a little less stretch, which means you're soon in contact with the fish. So you have to decide what kind of fishing you're doing and which kind of line suits you best. Because quite a bit of your fishing will necessitate you night fishing or waiting for the carp to bite, you will have to use a buzzer. Again, there are lots of buzzers available, and probably the best of the buzzers at the moment are the Delkims here on display. Very sensitive, usably loud and waterproof. They are ideal. However, these do cost £80 and you really pay for what you get. For those of you who don't have £80 to spend on buzzers, then the Fox Mini Micron at £40 is indeed a good choice. Again, loud, waterproof and sensitive. Certainly for the beginner these are ideal. As you can see, both buzzers have the LEDs which blink when you get a run, so you know which rod it is, and both have the bright beta lights which show you where to place your rod at night. Again, both buzzers, excellent choice for today's carp angler. To support the butt end of the rod, I use Fox rod locks, and as you can see there, the rods will actually rest in those locks and holding securely. If you do get a take from a fast moving carp, it cannot drag the back of your rod out of the rest and cause you to lose the fish, so those are essential. In order to mount your buzzers and also your butt grips, you are going to need both buzz bars and bank sticks. The buzz bars are dual-headed ones, which means you can screw a bank stick into each end, which stops any movement whatsoever. Again, these are made by Leslie's of Luton, although Obelisk also do a good version. The actual bank sticks are made by Obelisks, and these are well made. These have probably lasted in the region of 5 or 6 years, and that is the true sign of a good quality component. These can be pushed into the ground as they have a point on the front of them and are very secure indeed. As well as an audible indication of a take via your buzzer, you also need a visual indication of a take, and that's via either the swinger or the monkey hanger. When you get a take, as I'll show you later in the film, this will either drop back or rise up. These two are my favourite choices, both made by Fox, and both indicate any takes at all, whether they're minute or fast-blooded takes. Well, that's the catching side of things summed up. Now let's move on to the comfort side of things. As you can see here, I'm using what used to be known as a straightforward umbrella, and we've now progressed onto what are known as carp domes. You can either use a straightforward umbrella for single days or odd overnights, or you can use one of these by Kevin Nash for a longer session. This completely protects all your tackle, it's totally waterproof, and it won't blow over in even the greatest of storms, so it's ideal for my use. Now obviously if you're going to stay overnight, you will need some form of bed. The best ones that I've seen and used are the Fox beds here. This is the Ultra 2. But of course, if you're inexperienced or a beginner, you can make fold of the plain old sun lounger. Of course, this is the best one. Comfortable, you get no back pain at all. Now, if you're wanting to sit for 2 or 3 days bivvy fishing, then you do need a nice chair as well. It's all very well sitting on your bed chair, but this cannot be beaten. This is the Fox recliner chair, and I can sit out all day watching for fish, and that is vitally important. As I've said with all these tackle items, this is my tackle choice, and I'm sure that your tackle choice is suitable for your fishing. When you want to choose a new item of tackle, think about what you're doing, go into a tackle shop and spend your money wisely. Now if I can just conclude by saying one other item. Today's world is full of tackle thieves, so please insure your tackle. If you don't, you will be sorry, and I don't want to see that. Probably one of the most talked about, certainly the most written about aspects of carp fishing, in fact it's now been covered in videos, is that of carp baits. Now carp baits can be very confusing to the experienced carp angler, never mind the inexperienced angler, and I certainly don't intend to confuse you in these videos. Now as you can see, I've got some very basic baits here in front of me today. This is sweet corn, luncheon meat and bread. Of course you've probably bought this video and thought, I want to know all about boilies. Well, don't worry about that. I am actually going to tell you all about boilies a little bit later in the video, so don't just turn off. A little later in the series we're actually going to look at using sweet corn, using luncheon meat and using bread as well. These are 3 what I call convenience baits. Some people call them natural baits, but that really is restricted to worms and maggots. These are convenience baits. You can get these from any supermarket, which is ideal because you just go down to your local supermarket, take them off the shelves, take them down to the lake, and you're ready to catch carp, which is just what we want you to do today. But this video is going to contain more information on what everybody fears, and that's the boiled baits or the boilies. When I talk about boiled baits for carp, I'm actually referring to 2 types or 2 categories of boiled baits. I'm talking firstly about the ready-made baits here, and secondly the base mixes here. Now if you're an inexperienced carp angler, you're probably wondering what's the difference between the 2. Well, the difference here, of course, as you can see, is that the ready-mades already come ready rolled. Absolutely ideal. What these videos are trying to do is teach you how to catch carp. It doesn't matter what catches carp for the well-known anglers, it's what catches carp for you. And the best thing in carp fishing, as far as I'm concerned, is the ready-made boilie. People say ready-made boilies, they're really not the thing to follow in carp fishing, but you can take it from me, ready-made boilies are very effective. And I can tell you that if I fished a water where ready-made boilies outscored my normal baits, I'd use them. Because at the end of the day, all I want to do is catch carp, and all I want you to do is catch carp as well. And that's what carp fishing is all about. It's not about cutting your nose off to spite your face and sticking on a base mix that you've been told does work. It's what actually does work. And ready-made boilies, as you can see here, are ideal for the inexperienced carp angler because they're ready rolled. There are various types of base mixes available to catch carp today. There's a protein baits, fish meal baits and birdseed baits. Now all these baits will catch carp, but that's a confusing aspect about it. If I could tell you today that just one kind of bait would catch loads of carp, it would be great because you could just copy that exactly. But what I'm going to do today is give you two types of bait I have total confidence with, and that is the birdseed bait and the fish meal bait. Now as you can see, both baits are by NutriBaits and the products are by NutriBaits. I'm not for one moment saying that the only carp that you're going to catch today are with NutriBaits products, because that isn't true. All the top firms have great gear that will catch carp, but I only use the mixes that I have total confidence with, and these are two mixes. Now you're probably wondering, why doesn't he just use one mix? It'd be so much easier. Well, I can tell you from personal experience that carp in the winter feed different from carp in the summer. So I use base mixes and carp baits that attract the carp better in summer and better in winter. For the purposes of summer fishing, I use the big fish mix. That's a fish meal. Now there can't be many people in carp fishing today who haven't heard about fish meals. They are very, very popular indeed. In fact, most people who are interested in carp fishing have heard of fish meals. You know they catch your carp and they are an excellent bait. But that's not the only carp bait to use. The other carp bait that I'm going to recommend is the birdseed. Now there are two types of birdseed bases. One is the red spicy base mix and one is the yellow plain base mix. Now the problem with the red spicy baits is that for every water they work well, there's always one water that they don't work quite as well. So I wouldn't advise you to use red bird foods to start with. What I would draw your attention to is the plain yellow birdseed. There can't be many of you who haven't heard of the famous strawberry cream combination. This in fact is a combination I've been using since 1988, and that is a proof of a good bait. Never mind all this talk about baits which are brilliant one year and not brilliant another year. What you want is a bait that works year in, year out. And I can assure you that the combination I have in front of me here today is a combination that I've been using for the last 6 years. And that is the true test of a good bait. And it's such a good bait that I know that when people write to me and when you watch these films, that if you copy this bait exactly, this will catch your carp. And that's what I want you to do. So what I'm going to do today is concentrate purely and simply on making up the yellow birdseed bait. Making up baits is no problem at all. And the same process that we use for the yellow birdseed, we can actually use for making up fish meal baits. It doesn't differ at all. But rather than complicate the issue by making up two types of baits, we're just going to make one kind of boilie. Very, very easy indeed. Whilst bait making does frighten many people, there really is no need to be frightened about making boilies. It's just an aspect of carp fishing that when you've perfected, it's as easy as riding a bike. You know what it's like when you're riding a bike. Until you've ridden it properly for the first time, it's a nightmare. But I can assure you that once you've followed the process I'm going to tell you today, it is that easy. Honestly, there's no problems at all. Don't be worried about it. First thing is make sure you are in a place which is cool and comfortable. Today I'm making baits in my kitchen, but normally I make them in the garage. Wherever you are, make sure you're not going to be disturbed, because the worst thing that could happen is the phone going, somebody wanting to make a cup of coffee, things like that, because it's all a disturbance and you probably end up rushing your bait and making a right mess of it. And there's nothing more guaranteed to put you off for life than having the first few mixes go completely wrong. So follow this process and you'll be spot on, no problems at all. First thing we need to do is make sure you've got enough of all the flavours, enough eggs and enough base mix. So if you've only got a half full bottle of flavour, then don't even try and do it. Make sure you've got at least 3/4 full bottles, make sure you've got enough colour and make sure you've got enough of the enhancers. It's no good finding that you've got 3 of one thing and not even enough of another, because that can ruin the whole base mix. So do ensure that you've got everything to hand. First of all, crack the 6 eggs in the bowl like that. When you've done that, beat the eggs up. Now some people do in fact use a blender. In fact, I've found that a blender can put too much air into the eggs, and that actually can cause your bait to float. So just using a fork, and when I talk about a fork, I mean a sturdy fork. don't just use one of these flimsy forks that bends as soon as you do that, because it's very easy to whisk the eggs with a fork like this, but once you start trying to mix the paste as well with a flimsy fork, it'll go right to cock, so don't worry about that. Now it's time to add the flavours. As you can remember from our earlier recipe, we're using 2 mils of the strawberry, and I'm using a standard pipette here, and it's marked up to 3 mils. All you do is squeeze the end in tightly into the bottle, and it'll suck the flavour up. Just squeeze out the excess flavour that you don't need till it's down to 2 mils, and then into the bowl like that. So 2 mils of strawberry and 3 mils of the cream. Just one little point as well, always put the tops back on bottles, because there's nothing more guaranteed that when you reach for something you'll knock a full bottle of flavour over, and that can ruin your bait making for the night. 6 drops of the bergamot oil. Now these actually come with their own dropper, so you don't need to get a separate dropper. Be very careful when you add this, single droplets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's no need to whisk the eggs just yet. The final 2 additives are powders. Now some people say you don't have to add powders at this stage, you should add the powders to the base mix. I don't like doing it that way, I actually like to add them to the eggs. We're using a level teaspoonful of milk B plus. Again, this one though does want whisking in, otherwise it gathers on the top. When you've beaten it, just check inside the bowl and make sure none of the milk B has gathered round the bowl, because if it's gathered round the side of the bowls, it won't actually be in the recipe. So if there's none left, then go to your colours. Now I've got 3 colours on display here today. We've got the yellow, the orange and the red. And with this kind of bait, you're trying to make it as visual as possible, so you want a strong colour. Personally, I prefer yellow, though some people prefer red or orange. Be very, very careful with these colours, because you only need a very small amount to produce a bright bait. In time, you'll soon realise how much colour you need. If you can just see, you only need a very, very small bit of it. And that's enough, no more than that. Again, whisk this slowly. If you whisk it too fast, it will actually end up around the edges of the bowl. Do it nice and slowly. And you can see the colour taking effect. A nice bright yellow colour, and again look round the edges of the bowl and make sure there's no residue left. If you want a stronger bait colour, then just add more yellow. Do remember that the bait ingredients, in this case the Enovite Gold, will slightly taint your bait. But because it's a light coloured bait, it won't taint it too much. So you've done that, give it a final whisk around to make sure it's all mixed. And we're now ready to add the base mix to the liquids. Now you'll see in the recipes I've actually said that you need to add 16 or 18 ounces of Enovite Gold. Well, don't worry, you don't actually need to weigh out 16 or 18 ounces of Enovite Gold. All you need to do is add just enough to make a firm paste. The days of adding 4 ounces of this and 2 ounces of that are well gone. All you do is add enough base mix to make a firm paste, and that's what I'll do now. Now you can actually add it by hand, but I prefer to put it into something like that, and don't add too much at a time, just add a small bit like that. As you can see, the liquid will start to merge with the base mix. Makes a nice sloppy mess. Now if you add too much at this stage, all that will happen will be the base mix goes into big blobs, and that is not what you want. So get the initial base mix in it like that. Each time that I'm adding base mix to it, I'm adding probably about 1/2 to 3/4 of a pint of base mix. But I can assure you that as you become more proficient in bait making, you don't need to worry about that. It'll be second nature. Again, you can see the mix is now starting to firm up a bit more. Still nice and moist, which is what you want it to do. Keep adding that base mix. You see that I've used a large bowl. If you use too small a bowl, you'll find that you won't get 6 eggs worth of attractors, eggs and also base mix in it. See how now it's starting to firm up? And again, if you've got too flimsy a fork, it won't cut through this. Now at this stage, keep it very, very light indeed, because too much at this stage will ruin your base mix totally. See how it's getting harder to add? The moisture's been absorbed up and it's getting stickier and stickier. This is the stage when people tend to panic. Don't panic, it's still going well. We're almost at the stage where we're actually going to use our hands. Just a little bit more base mix. And that should suffice. As you can see now, it's virtually impossible to move the fork round. All the moisture's been taken up and we can actually use this by hand. As you can see, with your hands, you can sort of gather it up. As you can see from the bowl, all the dry mix has now been absorbed. Well, almost all of it has been absorbed. You can't get any more into that at all. And if you actually look at the consistency of this, this is now ready for rolling. Now people will be saying to themselves, well, how do I know that's ready for rolling? Well, a little tip I can give you is just break a little piece off in your hand, put it in your palm like that, and roll it in a circle. That makes a bait like that. That is perfect. If the bait goes like that, a bit like a peanut shape, then it's not firm enough, and if it starts to split, it's too dry. But I can assure you that at this stage, this is ready to make into the sausages. Now the problem about working at home is that your base mix can dry up. Once this starts to dry up, then you will find that you can't make the sausages. So the best thing you can do is put it into a plastic bag. Now I use standard freezer bags. See that? Don't be tempted to use cheap freezer bags. This is a good quality freezer bag. This keeps the moisture inside here and stops the bait drying out. Having made the bowl of paste and put it inside the plastic bag, we now need to get rid of all the ingredients and put them out the way, because you're going to need a little bit of space to roll the sausages on. So let's just get those out of the way. Right. As you can see, this is a Formica, which is what I roll my baits on. You've got to be very careful about what you actually roll the sausages on. We're actually going to use what is known as the Gardner or the Kingfisher rolling table. The days of actually having to roll baits by hand are long gone. You don't need to do that at all. We're actually going to use a roller ball maker. What it requires is you first, just to break off a bit of the paste like that, a little handful like that, just roll it a little bit by hand to get the sausage started, and then pick whatever size of roller ball you want. As you can see. And there's your sausage formed perfectly. Roll the ball down, chop the excess sausage off, and there you have the first sausage made. Now I'm not going to bore you by showing you how to make 20 sausages. I'll just show you how to make one more. Again, time will tell you how much you need to break off each time. A little bit down, roll by hand, excess cut off as so. perfect. I've now got 2 sausages there. I'm going to spend some time rolling up the rest of the sausages, about half a dozen more. Now this is the other part of the roller ball maker. This is actually what makes your round boilies. Now some people advise you to lay 3 sausages along the boilie maker like that. That's not what I'd advise you to do. When you do it like that, the boilies these can actually roll together, touch and stick, and you end up with the right mess. So what I would advise you to do is just to make 1 set at a time. Lay it along there, nice and smoothly. That's your top. On the top, firm hand pressure, probably about a dozen times. Lift up, and as you can see, homemade baits, just as good as ready-made and ready for the carp to feed on. Having made your baits, it's now a question of boiling them and putting a skin on them. You can actually use your baits without boiling them and use them as a paste bait, but for 95%, probably 99% of carp fishing purposes, we want to use them as boilies, which means we boil them. First of all, bring your water to the boil. When it is boiling, put it in a colander or a sieve, because that's going to allow you to lift your boilies out, and then add your baits to them. Don't add too many boilies, or you will find that with the boilies being cold and the water being hot, the temperature will drop and the baits won't boil properly. This recipe that I'm using here, there's a boiling time recommended of 75 seconds. One thing I would say is that as the baits are being boiled, just give them a stir round like that, and that stops them sticking together. As I said, these baits need boiling for 75 seconds. Other baits need boiling for a little longer than that. Some baits have to be boiled for 2 minutes. The recipes I've given you today require a boiling time of 75 seconds. That's the fish meals and the bird seeds. But protein baits, they don't take boiling so well, and they're only boiled for 60 seconds or so. Looking at the clock, 50 seconds have elapsed, so we're well on the way now. As you can see now, the baits with the boiling are starting to rise. The warm temperature's made them rise a little, as you can see there, up to 60 seconds, and they're getting lighter and lighter. Don't worry about this, because when they have cooled down, they'll sink perfectly. 70 seconds, you must not exceed the boiling limit, 74, 75. 75 seconds is up. Shake off the excess water, move the tray out of the way, and just shake those on there. What you need to do as well is to make sure that they dry properly. Just swirl them round in your hands. As you can see, the baits are starting to cool. The steam's coming off them and they're starting to harden nicely. Now obviously I'm not going to boil up 200 or 300 baits because that would waste too much of your time. I'm just going to show you how to make these. As those are cooling, you could go back and boil some more baits until you've boiled the whole mix. Whilst I will be covering the use of pop-up presentation in the rig segment of the videos, I think it's only right that at this stage I explain to you a little bit about how to make pop-ups. It's just like making boilies. Some people are very, very confused about it, and there really is no need to be. I've heard talk of microwaving, polyboiling, cork boiling, and it can get very confusing. What a pop-up is a boilie that you can actually add to a hook, and it can be suspended off the bottom, whereby the carp can find it and it's easy to hook them. Now how do you make a pop-up boilie? Well, obviously boilies don't float, because if they floated the carp would never find them. So you have to make your boilie pop up some way, and the way we do that is by adding either polystyrene or cork balls. Now it would be very easy if we could actually just push the polystyrene or the cork inside your standard mix. The problem with when you're using things like bird seeds or fish meals is the actual dry ingredients are very coarse, and because they're coarse they let the flavours out, and because the flavours can leak out, as well as the flavours leaking out, the water can leak in, and a pop-up which was presented off the bottom can absorb the water and sink to the bottom. So what we need to do is prepare a pop-up that it is very, very similar to our actually standard boilie, but doesn't take in water. The way to do that is to compromise, and that's to use 50% of your normal base mix, which in our case is the Enovite Gold birdseed, and 50% of the protein mix. As you can see, protein powders are very fine, and when you make a boilie consisting of a protein powder, the skin on the outside is very, very tight and doesn't let in water. So what we need to do is compromise. And what you need to do is just add 50% of each. Make sure it's exactly the same quantities. What I'm using here is 1/4 pint of Enovite Gold, and 1/4 pint of Nutribates High Noval. Now Nutribates High Noval is a protein mix, and Rod Hutchinson's got one, Cotswold Baits have got one, Premier have got one, Kevin Nash have got one. And these mixes, you add them together like that, inflate the bag, swirl it round until the two powders are mixed evenly. So you've got a very, very similar kind of base mix to your original one which you made your boilies out of, but it's a little tighter in the skin to make the pop-ups out of. You then just add this to your eggs and make it as a normal bait. You find that the skin produced is a little bit tighter. Having made the paste, which you'll find is a little bit firmer than the standard paste, you just need to break off little ball-sized segments. When you get it, just make a similar sized ball as you would want your pop-up to be. Flatten it down, and then get either a polystyrene or a cork ball pop-up. Flatten it nice and smooth, poly ball in the middle, wrap the paste securely round it, and roll. And that's a poly ball pop-up. Now the next thing to do is, well, after you've made all your baits, make about, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 dozen pop-ups, boil them for the standard period, and what I do to make them a little bit harder is I allow them to dry overnight. And because you're giving them 12 hours to dry rather than the standard 3 hours, it makes them even harder and they're less likely to take in water. And as you see later in the rig segment, these are a very, very effective way of catching carp. Standard polyball pop-up. Now no matter how good your bait is, and you'll be catapulting these out in the water, what you've got to do is make sure that the carp picks it up into its mouth. Now we all know carp are stimulated by the flavours and by the attraction. The problem is, of course, is that your hook bait is just one of 50 or 100 or 1,000 baits out there. How do you make it more attractive than the standard free bait? Well, I've come up with a little idea and a little process which I've called the over-flavouring of hook baits. If you remember back to our original mix, we used these flavours, and you remember that combination, and we used 6 eggs. Now what we can do, instead of using 6 eggs and those flavours, we can just use 3 eggs and those flavours. And of course what that will do with, it will give us twice as much smell, and that will mean they're over-flavoured. So we're just using the 3 eggs but the same amount of flavouring. Again, 3 eggs in the pan, normal flavours, and add your base mix. And of course I must emphasise this is only to be used with hook baits. If you were to use it with your normal standard baits, then of course there would be no advantage and the flavour would be too strong for the carp. Because you're just using it in single baits, the ones with a hook, that'll attract the carp to that single bait and you get more of a chance of a pickup. It's a good little idea and it'll certainly catch you a lot more carp, certainly in winter and probably in summer as well, so don't forget it. Having given your standard bottom baits, your freebies, 3 hours to dry, and given your pop-ups and your over-flavoured hook baits the night to dry, then of course you need to freeze them. Now if you're going to use them the same day, there's no need to freeze them at all, just take them down to the lake. But if you're going to use them in the next week or the next month, then obviously you've got to freeze them because otherwise they'll go off. So just put them in a bag like that. Normally I would probably put 2 or 3 pounds in a bag like this, take them to the freezer and pop them in the freezer. For this video we're actually looking at application of boiled baits, and as you can see here I've got 3 different sizes of baits, exactly the same bait though. Some 22mm baits, some 14mm baits, and finally some 8 to 10mm baits. Now with bait you are trying to attract the carp into your swim and get them to feed but not overface them. Now if you've fired out 50 boilies into your swim and you've just got 2 hook baits there, the chance of you catching is 2 in 50. If you've got 2,000 baits out there, the chances of you catching there are 2 in 2,000. So you don't need to put 2,000 boilies out each and every time you go fishing. Be sensible. If your bait attracts the carp, and that's the kind of bait I'm trying to get you to use, and I've detailed that earlier, then you don't need thousands of boilies. 50 to 100 boilies is sufficient. Don't spend money and fire out thousands of boilies because it's too much. Always use the smallest possible bait that you can get out to the feeding area, because you can spread these about. There's probably, what, 10 or 11 baits there. If you were to use 10 or 11 20mm boilies, that would soon fill the carp up, but you can put lots of this size bait out and keep the carp feeding in your swim. And the longer the carp is in your swim and feeding, the more chance you've got of catching it. Now, bait application isn't just about how much bait to put out, it's how you put the bait out. There are various tools of the trade to get the bait out, and I've got 2 of my favourite here today. The first is the catapult. Now, if you're fishing up to 60 or 70 yards, a catapult is very accurate indeed. It's just a question of drawing it back, letting it go, and firing the boilie out to the range. It is very easy to get used to a catapult. One thing I would say, if you're worried about wrapping your knuckles time and time again, just wear a glove on the hand that holds the catapult. Always make sure you've got some spare catapult elastic with you, because if the elastic breaks, don't just keep chopping it down and shortening it, otherwise your range and accuracy will be affected. Replace the elastic. For distance baiting, then a throwing stick is ideal. These are not as easy to get used to using as a catapult, so you do need to practice. But with these you can put a boilie out up to 130 or 140 yards, so anything over 70 yards, a throwing stick is essential. But do realise that you do need to get used to using them, and if bait is not going in the right place, it is wasted. The purpose of your baits is to draw the carp to your hook bait, not to fire it all over the place, and that's a true story of bait application. Now, I know there'll be quite a few of you watching this video who won't actually be able to afford to use as many boilies as you'd like to use. I know it'd be nice to be able to fire out 2,000 boilies or whatever when you need to do it, but how do you get that attraction into your swim if you can't afford boilies? Well, one of the most effective ways is by the way of using ground bait. With ground bait, you've got maximum attraction and minimum food. Very easy to use ground bait for carp. First of all, water in the bucket. You always add the solid to the liquid, not the other way around. So water in the bucket, and then plain old brown or white crumb. Add that to that and stir it in. As you can see at this stage, it's very, very sloppy, almost just a liquid. Next, you can add any form of additives you want at all. Evaporated milk is absolutely brilliant. Just pour that in. You can even add neat flavours or items like Nutrimino, Minomino, Ambio. Pour that in. And if you're using boilies and want to give the carp a taste of the boilies, why not put a few mini boilies in? Or a few broken up boilies. Again, mix with your hand, and as you can see, it's starting to take some form of slop. You can also add more ground bait to it to firm it up a bit, or you can add neat base mix. Keep moving it round with your hand until you've achieved a workable quantity. As you can see there, it's starting to firm up, and that feels just about right. Just enough to make a ball of it. It won't sink down to the bottom in a big solid lump, and it won't explode in midair because it's too wet. Like that. And that completes our first look at practical carping. I hope you've enjoyed what I've had to show here today. I've tried to be basic and explain exactly what I would tell you to do. Now, you don't have to copy it exactly, you can copy what is appropriate to your fishing. Your fishing isn't always going to be exactly the same as mine. The same as mine isn't always the same as Kevin Maddox, Rod Hutchinson and people like that. I'm quite sure if you copy what is appropriate to your fishing and employ it on your waters, you'll definitely catch more carp. The things I've covered are basic common sense advice. Over the years I've learnt it from other people, and I'm hoping to pass on the logic that I've learnt and the common sense advice that I've picked up of other people and help you catch carp. Carp fishing isn't about blanking. Carp fishing isn't about spending thousands of pounds on tackle. Carp fishing is seeing those indicators go up and getting a carp on the bank. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm sure if you apply the logic, you'll definitely catch more carp. Look forward to seeing you in part 2.